Welcome back to the White Coat Club. This is Lindsey and Nicole, and today we also have Michaela joining us because she is our underclassmen guru. And today we are talking all about underclassmen and what they can do now. If you like to listen to our content and you are an underclassman who's currently planning to apply to BSMD, don't forget to like and subscribe to our content for more information about direct med and college admissions. Okay, Michaela, if anyone has missed you because you haven't been on for a while, will you give us a quick introduction of
Yes,
yourself?
hi everyone. It's good to be back. My name is Michaela. I used to be an admissions counselor at a Big Ten state university, and I've been here at WinPrep for 5, 6 years and kind of specialize in underclassmen, all the resume building that happens in the younger years before students become seniors. Just working with them on passion projects and resume building and how to kind of add the right leadership to their resumes. And it's just something that I feel passionate about. And so I'm here to share all the information with you all on this podcast.
Yay, and we're so glad that you are passionate about it because working with younger kids can sometimes be tricky. I feel like sometimes families, kids, and honestly, counselors sometimes don't know what to do. College applications are kind of far away. There is a lot to be doing though, and so hopefully we can kind of demystify that with you all as we go through this process. I think the biggest question we always hear from students and like on new client calls is when is the best time to start?
Yeah, so I think for one thing, it depends on what you're wanting to do. So the best time to start on just college applications would be to join, Moon Prep as a junior. And then we can do all the college list planning and everything. But if a student is wanting to do a passion project or resume build with us, then the best time to be joining is in ninth or 10th grade. Even the summer before ninth grade is a fine time to start, but really 10th grade is kind of the strongest year to get started. But of course, we allow kind of students earlier. That's perfectly fine. So I think it just depends on what the student is really wanting to get out of their college application experience. Just applications, junior year is great. A lot of resume advice and resume building, definitely before junior year.
I have one family that I worked with, their like older student on, and the dad always jokes with me. He's like, "Oh, I got another one coming." She's like really young. I think whenever the older sister graduated, she was maybe still in elementary school. And so I
Yeah.
was like, "It's a little too early." Is there like too early of a time to get started?
I would say before ninth grade is pretty too early to do things. I have a couple eighth graders and they are really planning out their passion project that they're going to launch in ninth grade. But when you're applying to colleges, they're only looking at your resume activities from your high school experience. That does not include, seventh and eighth grade. So we can plan for some things. We can line a couple things up, for ninth grade, but we really can't take any big actionable steps.
Yeah, it is kind of tough. I guess
Mhm.
unless like you were to like continue the activity, like if you volunteered at the library
Mhm.
for 7th through whatever, sophomore year, junior year, that could be totally fine. But like
Mhm.
they won't really care if you started in 6th grade or you started in ninth grade because that's all they're
Mhm.
really tracking.
Yeah. Mhm.
And when um when you start working with like a ninth or 10th grader, what kind of things do you typically get started with them on?
So I think one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle is mapping out all of their courses. We just want to kind of create an entire plan of action for them over the course of, let's say, their 4 years or their 3 years, depending on when they're joining us. We want an entire plan of action, and that's going to include, what colleges are we targeting? What courses are we making sure that we are adding to their transcript so that we're not limiting ourselves to what colleges we can apply to later? And then, of course, we have all these actionable steps regarding their resume, but that kind of gets broken down into these subcategories a little bit. And then we have long-term scholarship planning too. Nicole, do you have any suggestions on course selection for students over their 4 years?
Yeah, definitely. I absolutely agree with you that starting really anything before ninth grade is kind of hard. But a lot of times students are starting to take high school courses in eighth, sometimes seventh, in very rare situations. Sometimes it depends on the state. Um, so sometimes it is you do have the ability to kind of map out a course selection or like a rough draft of a course selection that early on. Math is typically something that you could be ahead in. English is one of them as well, where, you might take algebra in eighth grade. So it's going to alter the course of, what you're taking in high school. Now, if you're starting in ninth, which is what we recommend, we can still talk about it. What you really want to target is how am I going to be able to max out what's available to me? And then am I thinking outside the box of what could be available that's just not at my specific high school? So again, typically it's the math and sciences that we're talking about, the math specifically. You're usually only limited to one per year from your district. So sometimes kids will take like algebra 2 over the summer between ninth and 10th if they're not going into high school with taking algebra 2 in ninth grade. They'll take algebra 2 maybe over the summer, so that way they have the credit for it, and then that way they can max out and be taking like AP stats in 12th grade. I know they just added the AP pre-calculus, so some kids, every district is different. Sometimes you have to take the prereq, sometimes you don't have to take a prereq. So chat with your counselor too. Some states have, like, I know in North Carolina, you could do North Carolina virtual school where you could take courses on your own and they'll count. There's tons of different things you can do. What I would recommend before you get like a too ahead of yourself, do the research for your state, chat with your counselor, chat with like administrators at your school, like really, and be mindful of like truly your abilities. We don't want to overdo it. Um, we want the grades to be strong. We don't want to push you too much. But have these conversations, do the research is probably the number one thing. And then we can definitely map out, which math you'll take each year, which history you'll take each year. Obviously, keeping in mind like your school requirements, you have to take an art class, things like that. But then also chatting, like I said, with counselors at your school to learn like your specific ins and outs.
And that is such a good point, is that some schools will just kind of place you on just the traditional trajectory, which might put you kind of out of sequence for getting the right math classes. I think, again, like Nicole said, math is where it shows up kind of the most. But you might be kind of out of sequence for being super competitive for these BSMD programs. And so that's why just getting a curriculum in advance from your high school counselor and planning out everything is really important.
Yeah, and when I worked as a high school counselor, sometimes parents would come in and be so angry, like, "Well, I didn't know my student could jump ahead and take something over the summer." And it's like, well, if you don't ask, you don't always get to kind of know these things. So definitely do your research.
One thing I'd say too is like I have like a couple students who are young, like maybe like freshmen, sophomores, and every school would be different about how many APs you can take as like a freshman, sophomore, even as a junior. And so I have some kids who went from like maybe one AP in like their freshman year to like 4 or 5 in their sophomore year because they're like, oh, like I'm really smart, like I've always been good at school, like I've excelled. But jumping from 1 to 5 can be a big like culture shock almost because it's a lot more work, it's a lot more um, like a lot more assignments, a faster pace. And so take those things into consideration. Just because you can take like, 7 APs in 1 year or 5 APs in 1 year doesn't always mean that you should. So take into consideration like your time that you'll have to spend on things if you even like the subject and the overall pace, your workflow as you're going through your college or your sorry, as you're going through your course selection. And what about like resume building, Michaela? I know you kind of mentioned a little bit about that. How do you build resumes with your students?
Yeah, so I think that creating kind of like a long-term plan is where, again, this is going to benefit the student. because we want to make sure that we're hitting, if they're planning on going to a BSMD or direct medical program, we want to make sure that they are hitting leadership and research and volunteering, like community service volunteering, as well as clinical experience. And so, mapping things out regarding, okay, leadership, where am I going to be adding that? Because as a freshman or even sophomore, it's going to be hard for you to get a leadership role in a school club or even a local club, like that's not in your school, but like local to your community. It's hard to kind of get those early leadership positions. And so you have to kind of get involved at this young age and then plan for leadership in a later year. And so it's really setting those foundational moves towards leadership that's so important in, the younger years. And then of course, you know leaning on your network as far as how to add clinical experiences, any doctors in your circle for clinical. But resume building really just takes a plan of action, basically, of how are we going to make sure we add these things and where to put them along the way. And it's really hard to kind of like map that whole thing out in a podcast because it's so individual to the student. But that is basically what we're doing is here are all these different areas for your resume. Let's make a short-term and long-term plan for each one of these areas.
Yeah, and I think similar to course selection, like having some flexibility in these
Mhm.
plans is always super key because as you get older, you'll of course develop like more interests and might realize, oh, actually, like computer science isn't really my jam. Would rather take like a psych class or, you know, the HOSA club that I joined as a freshman, maybe isn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. And, it's kind of a waste of my time. Like I'm going to drop it and do something else. Like having flexibility, I think, in your plan is always key to success.
Yeah, even like planning out things to make sure that there is flexibility is a,
Yeah.
a good plan too. Because
Yeah.
things change.
Things will change. And one other thing too that I guess kids could be thinking about, and I don't ever think it's too early to start thinking about, is college selection.
Mhm.
It's such a big choice, and we do have some seniors who join us in like the beginning of their senior year who have no college list, or their college list is like 80 schools deep, and they don't really know what they're looking for. Um, and so, you could be starting to do college visits and things like that, starting to think about what kind of school you want, what the cost, you think that your family will be able to afford, what major, what kind of features you want. It's like never too early to start thinking about these types of things. So, um, yeah, that could definitely be something in ninth and 10th grade you already begin preparing for.
And then another area that can be really mapped out early is scholarships. So with scholarships, there are websites you can go on to, scholarships.com, FastWeb. There's lots of different databases out there. And they'll actually let you know of scholarships that are available to you in younger years. Now, the majority of scholarships will be due and available during a student's senior year, but there are ones you can apply to early. These are outside scholarships that can be applied to any college. It's not tied to any college's, financial aid program or anything like that. It's just applicable to any college. So making a list of these in a spreadsheet of which ones can you apply to early or which ones mapping out that are in your area of interest, that like tie into your future major or match your specific information that you can apply to as a senior. That is kind of a long-term planning step too, that even parents can get involved with.
That's a good one. I feel like a lot of kids don't think about it until they get accepted to colleges and
Mhm.
they see like the estimated cost of how much it's going to attend and
Yep.
then panic sets in. Um, so yeah, starting early is such a good idea that I think gets forgotten quite a bit.
And that's another point, in your college selection, just looking at what colleges are going to be on your list later. You can look at the sticker price of those early and start to make a plan for them. And often a large component of that plan is scholarships. So again, just like all of it is mapping every single part of the application process out from the beginning.
Hmm. Yeah, that's always good advice. Plans, and communication, I feel like is always our big like mottos here on our podcast. And so that is once again coming through for like underclassmen. Okay, and so what kind of things should students be prioritizing if they're younger classmen?
Yeah, I'll take the lead on this one. So as far as the resume goes, again, I had mentioned leadership before. One of the ways to do that is to join a school club. Let's say that you join your school's robotics team and you're joining as a freshman, sophomore, if that's available to you. And you're obviously joining as a member, you're getting involved in the team, but then your plan would be to become your like team lead at some point. You would want to be leading the team your junior or senior year. And that is how you kind of make a plan for leadership. And leadership should be something that you cover across a couple different school clubs or local organizations, HOSA, things like that. So I would just say, join things that you plan to take a leadership role in over the next couple of years. Similar to passion projects as well, passion projects don't have to only be tied to medicine. They really just need to have a community impact, showing that you care about the people around you. So starting that early or joining local organizations that you could take, an individual lead on a project later, that is all part of this leadership too. You can also be tying it into passion projects and community impact. So this would be like joining a organization that helps refugee children kind of get um familiar, with their new home if they had just arrived to your city. And then, the next year you might be running a backpack drive for them before they start going back to school. And so kind of locating community organizations that you could take a leadership role in later so you can show a community impact. Those are all ways across passion projects and leadership on your resume that you can be like making a plan for.
Love it. And I think one thing too to remember is you definitely don't have to be a leader in everything. I think like too many leadership positions can sometimes be like a flag because how do you have enough time for everything? So, if you have just like a few things that you're really heavily involved in and you seek out positions there, that's totally fine. It doesn't, you don't have to do everything just to get that leadership position. Of course, you'll want some, but it doesn't have to be everything. And what about testing, Nicole? What do you kind of tend to suggest to kids about testing?
Yeah, I mean, I think testing should absolutely be on your radar, kind of starting in 10th grade. I mean, we want, I think it's probably even gotten earlier, but typically we'd want you to be testing or start testing by the fall of your junior year. So, like, scores have definitely not been where students' expectations are at, I think, this year. So some kids are even starting to test even earlier, like in the summer before 11th grade, because it is much more important than I think a lot of students realize.
Completely agree. It's kind of like the make or break at some places if you're going for BSMD, because very few programs are test optional. And so it does really limit your choices if you have like a score that just like isn't going to be super competitive. And like how competitive you need will definitely vary from program to program, but not having that score, I think is super stressful. Like I have some kids who are still testing as seniors into October. And so their college list is just like up in you know, kind of up in the air because we're like, maybe we're going to add on these schools. Maybe you're going to get your score. Maybe you won't get your score. And I think like the pressure of having to perform well oftentimes means kids do worse because it is like one of those exams I think that you can get into your head a little bit too much. So
I
testing
completely
early, yeah, testing early is like the key. Gets you out of your head a little bit.
early and then like plan to keep testing. I feel like a lot of kids will,
Yes.
oh, well, I'm going to test in October and then I'll test in March. There's such a
Hmm.
gap between those.
And then you're just like spreading it out for so long. Yeah, I think that kind of concentrating your energy on testing is smarter rather than like spreading it out. And honestly, with a new SAT and the soon to be new ACT, I just don't think there's going to be as like much material out there. Like there's not a lot of digital SATs with the new reading format. So like you kind of do run out of stuff. Like, you have to go to like third party material, and I think that that stuff just like isn't always as good and as accurate. And so if you start studying too early with plans not to take it for the next 9 months, you're definitely going to run out of like material to study.
Yeah, and I think people don't realize that there's not nearly as many tests offered in the spring as there are in the fall.
Yeah, it's like a big gap, a huge gap. And over the summer too, like kind of surprisingly for the SAT, it's like June and then you got August, nothing in July.
Yeah.
I think this is another reason why planning ahead is so important, because if you are looking at your college list well in advance as a freshman and sophomore, then you're going to know those kind of benchmarks, those milestones to hit for your SAT, and then you can be adjusting that college list. I mean, if so many of your programs kind of require a 1550 and the first time you take your SAT, it's a 1350, you might be like, okay, I'm not sure if I can reach that 1550 mark. That seems like a pretty big jump to get. So then you can be adjusting your college list, not 2 weeks before the deadline. You can do it early and make a better plan.
Planning ahead. Again, when it comes to testing, so you're not doing it last minute is super key. Okay, and then I think the big one too that we always talk to kids about, especially in like our new client calls and our like ninth and 10th graders, passion projects, community
Mhm.
impact projects, independent projects. They go by like so many different names. Um, what is a passion project, Michaela?
Yes. So a passion project is going to be something that is rooted in your personal experience or in your local community. So just sort of an issue that you have run across that you feel like, you know, not as much is being done about it as could be done. So you're just taking action. This is missing in my community, so I'm going to take action about it. Um, for example, there was a girl a few years ago who she was already volunteering with her local Red Cross and organization, and where she lived, had a very high homeless population. And as she was going around with the Red Cross organization, doing her rounds and everything with them, she noticed there were a lot of like new mothers. She saw multiple infants on her different like weekly rounds with them. So she just fundraised on her own to put together these little kind of newborn packs, like just new mother packs. And like this was something that just wasn't being covered by what the Red Cross was doing, and no other group was doing anything about it either. So she just did it on her own, just kept track of how many packs that she gave out, you know, on her own volition. And so that is just something, a perfect example of just seeing something that's not getting done in their community and just doing something individually about it. So it can be tied to your major, if your cousin had really bad scoliosis or something and you want to do an awareness project about that, that is perfectly fine. That would be tied to your future major or doing something in your community. You just want to show, it's just meant to show that you're not just doing the typical resume ideas, just the typical resume activities, that you are truly showing that you care about a community of people, or a topic, and that you're going to pour your heart and soul into this kind of like side thing that you're doing. And that is just what a passion project is. And we do go into this. We have a little boot camp that we put together that we run during the spring. And it goes into so many examples and showing you how to brainstorm for your passion project, because they're so individual. It's hard to even really just like give a whole description here. It would be a whole different podcast on just passion projects. But this is what we aim to do over our boot camp. And we call that Project IQ, because passion project. So it's Project IQ, and it's going to start January 29th. It runs every Wednesday for 5 weeks. So January 29th through February 26th. And that starts at 7 o'clock Eastern, 4 o'clock Pacific time. And it just runs for an hour and 15 minutes. And we go through a lot of brainstorming, how to brainstorm your passion project, different examples of passion projects, how it should be showcased on your resume, and how to level it up. So it's not just one-dimensional, how to get more mileage out of it and make sure there's multi-layers going on with your passion project too. So join us, in January to talk about that more. And it's a free boot camp for Moon Prep students. You just have to be a Moon Prep student to attend, but otherwise it's just a perk of being one of our students. And so I hope you join us in January to add that X factor to your resume.
Yes, and if you want to become a Moon Prep student, you can go to our website. There's like a contact page, moonprep.com/contact. Sign up for a new client call. We'll tell you all about our services, about Project IQ in more detail as well. And then you too can come to Project IQ and learn from Michaela and some other Moon Prep staffers as well. And I think like another big question we always get asked as well, maybe we should get asked this more often as too, because I think sometimes parents will overstep boundaries or maybe not be involved enough. So maybe Nicole, could you start off telling us a little bit about what should the role of the parent look like?
Yeah, absolutely. We really want parents to be involved. This is a huge decision and a huge process, whether it's your first kid or, your last kid going through it. But we absolutely want the student to gain some autonomy in the process too. Learning how to do things on their own, understanding responsibility, timeline management, deadline management, just like overall taking accountability for their own future. We've definitely had situations where the parent, was just a little bit more invested than the student was. So be supportive, but kind of make room for your student to grow also.
Yeah, any other advice, Michaela, about parents' involvement?
Yes, I think that as these students are so young, they're not going to have the same network that, full adults obviously have. And so I think that just having the parents are wonderful to kind of be included in these big picture planning meetings, because they might have, within their network, they might have a physician or an optometrist friend that can start those clinical hours early, so that the student is doing less cold calling and things like that to get those clinical hours. And so we love a parent's involvement that is definitely kind of supportive from the back end. I love it when a student comes to a meeting with me and we're going to be brainstorming, XYZ for their resume. And then they say something like, oh yeah, and my mom helped me put together a spreadsheet of scholarships that we talked about last time. I sat down with my mom and we threw on a TV show and we looked for scholarships together. Here's the scholarship spreadsheet that we came up with. Or, my dad got me in touch with this buddy of his, and so I'm going to do 15 hours of shadowing next month. Really a wonderful kind of like support and supplement to the plan of action that we're putting in place is the kind of perfect role for a parent. It's harder when the parent kind of like wants to just sort of hand the student off and not touch the college process again. We want to really like join your family and have it be kind of a group effort to get the student, all the different experiences and everything that we can, and just do a fully well-rounded experience for them. And that definitely includes the parents' network and experiences as well.
Yeah, I think parent involvement is always kind of key to success, especially for younger kids, as we only see the kids like maybe once a month. And so having a parent on our side to help keep the student on track and kind of
Mhm.
moving forward towards their goals is always really helpful. But ultimately, having it be student driven and the parents being there as like a support, not
Yeah.
like the main person moving things forward is really what I would say.
Mhm. Just as a note, at Moon Prep, after we have a meeting with a student, especially underclassmen, we always put out meeting summary notes. So we'll send an email that says, thank you for meeting with me today. Here's what we covered, and here are our action steps before our next meeting, which is planned on this day. And it'll have, 3 or 4 bullet points of check in with this club to, wrap up the discussion about XYZ, whatever. And so there's a full email that comes to both the student and the parent of this is what we covered. So what we're planning to cover in the next meeting. And so having the parent there on the back end to make sure that those steps were completed before the next meeting, that definitely helps things kind of keep going. And that's how we work together with families and parents together to make sure the student is, maximizing their potential. To continue on the topic of parents, one thing that parents can really help plan and manage for the student is college visits.
Mm.
And that would just be, planning out. Of course, we're looking at the college list pretty early. We know, 3 of the schools in New York are are on our list. And we live in Virginia. So just planning out, over spring breaks and summers, just strategic little trips to be able to do college visits is definitely something that a parent can be involved with and helping facilitate, because that all helps with demonstrated interest later. If you use the student's email address that they plan to use on a college application later, their college visit will actually count towards the school's demonstrated interest to show the school that the student is very interested in the school because they were interested enough to plan an out-of-state trip. And so that is something, just like helping put together a scholarship list, parents can be planning strategic, family trips to also hit a couple college lists. And this can truly start as early as freshman, sophomore year as well. Because, the summer before senior year, that is busy with essays and last testing attempts. Like, it is very busy before senior year. We don't want to be doing 15 college visit trips right before their senior year and taking away from their essay time. That's not going to help things. So planning well in advance for those college lists, even planning family vacations around colleges that you might want to visit. All of that is really helpful. Just make sure that it's, counted by using the student's email when you sign up for those college tours.
And take notes.
Yes.
Um, I know I have the memory of a small little goldfish, and so I won't remember what college said this versus that. And a lot of these colleges, of course, will track demonstrated interest, but they'll also ask later on why you want to attend this school. This, of course, you can do like online research or attend like, informational sessions that are virtual. But if you like did an in-person tour and they told you about like XYZ feature or like this specific opportunity or something along those lines, like those are great things to be including it because those are like personal, like lived experiences that you had that, very few other people had as well. So kind of taking notes and making notes of like what you liked and what you didn't like about schools too, especially if you're going like on a long series of, you're going to 3 colleges in one weekend or whatever. It can be hard to keep track of everything after a while.
The majority of these schools are going to have a why did you apply to this school essay. And so just having like a notebook of notes that you can catch those details is such a good idea.
Yeah, keeping track of those types of things always good. And I think it's something that kind of gets forgotten a little bit, or it's,
Mhm.
the last thing on the priority list, but it really should be the first.
Especially if you're visiting a school and you're in 10th grade and you're not going to be applying to that school for 2 years, just keeping those details is great. Because also if a representative attends your local like school fair, your college fair at your school or in your area, and then you're able to walk up and say, Oh yeah, my tote bag that I got on campus is my favorite. I take it everywhere I go. It's so great. Like that is a note that they could come back and put in their database about you. Um, all of it helps, those little details.
Little details. They
Mhm.
really do matter.
Yeah. Mhm.
And something I tell kids too, it's like, maybe your family like doesn't have a lot of vacation time. They can't go on road trips like specifically for college visits. Um, it's okay, like if you are visiting like a family in North Carolina, stop by if UNC is close by or Duke, NC State, you could see three universities within like what, like an 8 mile radius. If you're in the area, like it'd be a great way to do it, or whatever it might be. So thinking about how you can maybe tack on a college visit to an already pre-planned trip, especially if you don't have like the vacation time or funds to do it elsewhere. Um, but honestly, even if like you can't go visit every single school on your list, or every single college out there, that's for sure. But at least like getting like some diversity in your college visits, I think is always a good idea. So stopping by like your safety school option, getting like the lay of the land there and getting hopefully excited about going there too. Going to private versus public, big, small, and medium in different settings too, I think is always like really helpful to students as they start to formulate those college visits.
I think without getting into individual specifics, we've covered as much as we can on a podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, everything is so student specific. So like this advice is definitely general. Not every student will follow in like what we've been talking about, and that's okay because everyone should be different, should be unique. And that's why hopefully you work with us, attend, Project IQ, and we can help customize these types of things for you. Cool. But I think that's it for us today. If you have any questions, let us know. But we'll be back in a couple weeks with some more great content about our college and BSND admissions news.
Thank you for joining us today.